Joining us now live from Kyiv is NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel. Richard, thanks for your excellent report and the excellent reporting that you continue to do. I do want to get a sense, you're on the ground, you're seeing how some of these fights and resistance are going on the ground, and you also have access to this high-level evaluation that there's a stalemate. Tell me how you evaluate that statement against what you're seeing.
So right now we're seeing two kinds of resistance. We're seeing military resistance, which is so far keeping Russian forces from Kyiv. Russian forces have been kept back to the northern suburbs of the city, and they have not been able to advance in days. So we're seeing conventional military resistance. And we're also seeing civil disobedience. We're seeing that in Kherson. And Kherson is one of the only places where Russians actually occupy the city. They patrol on foot. They've imposed a kind of shadow government, but people are not accepting it. And Kherson was considered one of the more pro-Russian communities here. Before this war began, and I think this was one of the things that Vladimir Putin was counting on, there were deep divides here. There were divides between East and West. There were divides between those who spoke Russian and those who speak native Ukrainian. And Kherson was considered the closest to Russia, as was Mariupol. But if you look at what's happening in Mariupol, and if you look at what is happening in Kherson right now, there's real hatred for Russia. People are swearing blood oaths. They are leaving the city if they can. They're being strip searched when they're leaving Mariupol as the guards check to see if they have some sort of Nazi insignia tattooed, swastikas tattooed on their body. And in Kherson, they're standing up to gunfire. So the Russian plan, both from a hearts and minds campaign, if you will, plan to occupy and easily pacify areas that were thought to be pro-Russia, that's not working. And its conventional military plan to drive into the cities is not working for now.
Let's talk a little bit more about Mariupol. At this point, there's been an offer or request by Russia that Ukraine simply cede Mariupol. The Ukrainians have rejected that offer, but the idea that maybe Vladimir Putin is giving up on the idea of taking Kyiv and the government and instead would be satisfied by more territorial gains. Explain that to us. Give me some context around that.
So throughout this conflict, we've been guessing about Vladimir Putin's intentions. And unfortunately, we've often been guessing them incorrectly. There was a camp that thought that Vladimir Putin wouldn't invade, and that camp included the Ukrainian government. It included President Zelensky, by the way, who thought right until the end that Russia wasn't going to launch a full-scale invasion. Then there was a camp that maybe Putin would take a piece, that he would just take the Donbass, or maybe he would take a land bridge to Crimea. Now, if he wants a land bridge to Crimea, that would be able to connect the territory of Russia to the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia annexed after it took it over in 2014, then he would have to take the city of Mariupol and Kherson and a few other areas in that southern region along the Black Coast and the Sea of Azov. From Putin's perspective, that would give him a win. It would allow him to secure Crimea and secure the water supply to Crimea, which also flows through that area. But is that going to be enough? And if people misjudged Putin the first time, I think we would be foolish to allow ourselves to be fooled twice and assume that he would just be satisfied with a slice in the east, especially when his troops are continuing to dig in. There's new satellite images showing that the troops are still mobilizing around the borders of this country, particularly up in the north of Belarus. So it is not at all clear that he wants to only take Mariupol and would somehow be satisfied with that and walk away. I think those calculations, we were having those calculations
one of the other things
in the beginning, but now that he is in this war, it's not clear.
So let's talk about, at the beginning, there was also a calculation and potentially not officially, but we heard there may have been an offer or a plan by the U.S. to get Volodymyr Zelensky out of Kyiv, either to Western Ukraine, a place like Lviv or somewhere else that might have been safer, or even to Poland to have a government in exile. He refused to leave Kyiv, as did his members of parliament and government officials. And Kyiv still stands, and they are still in Kyiv, and you are still in Kyiv. We do know that there continue to be assaults on that city. There was a deadly assault overnight at a shopping mall. What is the situation on the ground where you are in Kyiv?
So there was also a big intelligence failure that I think we should acknowledge. The U.S. correctly predicted that Vladimir Putin would do some sort of invasion. But the intelligence failure was that they thought the Ukrainian government was going to imminently collapse and that Zelensky would have to become some Charles de Gaulle figure operating in exile, when now he's still here and he's leading an effective resistance. You asked about the mood here in Kyiv. It is a very strange city right now. There are 2 million people here, according to the mayor, give or take. Most of them are men, because men are not allowed to leave this country. If you notice where you are, lots of the refugees, it's women, children, and the elderly. The men are still here. There's no real work, so to speak. Nothing is open. There's not the ability to shop. So you have lots of men in their houses with no families, living presumably on crackers and salami. There's no alcohol in the city. The whole city has been declared dry by the mayor. Everyone is participating in some form in civil defense. People walk around in sort of militarized clothing with colored armbands around their upper arm, either yellow or blue, to show that they're loyal to the army. There's checkpoints on the streets. You're asked for your papers every time you go through a checkpoint, or often when you go through a checkpoint. It harkens back to an earlier time when you are asked to see your papers every place you go in a city full of men bracing for war.